morning, everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion today on hybrid energy solutions, a new approach to solving Africa's energy needs. We've got a very informed panel who come from all sectors, and we'll be speaking to each one of them in turn about their expertise and experience on hybrid energy solutions, what they are, what the future developments in respect of them are going to be, how they're all working, and where are there new business opportunities and growth markets in this area. I'm going to introduce my panel, and then we will go straight to the panelists who will address various issues. So the first panelist, wave your hand, is Gabriel Chris. He's the head of engineering at Empower, which provides solar and PV battery solutions of up to 10 megawatts. Our second panelist is Mike Rousseau. Mike, wave your hand. He's an independent independent energy thought leader who's an expert in the field of energy and energy management. And he, interestingly enough, has advised both Eskom, the IPP office, and NERSA. So he will have some very useful insights into how, if I can put it broadly, the public sector sees these solutions as these hybrid energy solutions. Our third panelist is Ad Dunkers. Ad, please wave your hand. He is a renewable energy and project finance advisor with RECP Finance Catalyst, and he will be speaking on various hybrid solutions, including biomass. Our fourth panelist is William Price. William, please wave your hand. He's the country manager of Enel Green Power in South Africa, but he's also been looking at places like Zambia and Ethiopia, and I think there's some very interesting lessons for us all there. And our final panelist is Danny Friedrichs, CEO of Mango Solar, a Kenyan and German-based company bringing electricity into regions of Africa where they haven't previously had electricity. William, I think we'd like to start with you. What are the hybrid energy solutions that Enel offers? Who are your typical clients? Where have you offered them? In which countries, what industries? And how do you see these developing going forward?
Well, thank you for having me for this program. Happy to be here. For Enel, Enel's a global company, so we provide energy solutions to a very broad scale, not only multiple countries, but also various different customers, from utility scale projects to much smaller, even through our Enel X type situation where we're doing like household or demand response type hybrid solutions. Since Enel is a renewable energy company and we do all forms of renewable power, I would say we're uniquely qualified to be able to combine different energy solutions. Enel Green Power Enel Green Power arm is we only do renewable energy projects. So while Enel does fossil fuels, we focus on green energy solutions. So for there's probably other panelists here that might want to touch on the hybrid solutions where you would combine fossil fuels with renewables, and that's not Enel, not Enel Green Power. So so the solutions we provide is combining such as a renewable energy project with solar thermal. We've done this in a couple different areas around the world. The United States, we've done a mining solution where we provide a solar and geothermal solution there. We've also recently introduced battery energy storage. Now, batteries themselves are not renewable, so this is a common misunderstanding because battery can be charged by any form of energy. So we've also provided that type of solution. the batteries that we're installing and that we bid on are up to about 80 megawatts of supply. And the risk mitigation tender that's recently been out, we bid, or our tender included three different clusters of projects, and all those had 80 megawatts of battery energy storage. Usually what's important to know about hybrid solutions is technically there's a lot of solutions available. Renewable as a form of energy is variable, such as wind and solar. That we do in Southern Africa. And if the customer is looking for a more consistent or more power supply that's not variable, of course, you can introduce a form of battery storage. The customer usually dictates the size, the demand. And as a company, we can cater a solution to that request. So whether it's a commercial, an industrial type application, mine, heavy energy user, or even utility scale. And
William, without giving away any trade secrets, how are these power purchase agreements structured so that you make sure that you are paid? Is there a capacity charge and an energy charge, or is there only the energy charge or only the capacity charge? If your off-taker isn't one of the utilities backed by a government or sovereign guarantee, how do you ensure that you will receive payment?
Sure, that's a good question. And again, it's catered to the supplier, or not supplier, excuse me, the off-taker. So who's taking the energy usually dictates what their demand is, and then we as a Nel cater solution what it would cost. Certainly with batteries is an interesting topic. It's probably a topic that the other panels will touch on. But a battery by itself, once it's charged, every time it's discharged, it goes through a charging cycle. Usually batteries have so many charging cycles in their life. So if you had a solution where a battery had 1,000 life cycles and you use it every day, well, then that battery get used up. If you didn't use it, it would sit there and then it would prolong it, and that would be a different type of business model. So again, from a capacity payment, certainly if you have a storage and it's energy that would sit there, and like this risk mitigation tender that's come out in Southern Africa, there is a capacity component because it's a energy source that's on demand. So it's energy that's sitting there. It's potential energy that when you're called upon, you would have to deliver. So if you set up an agreement where it was energy only, then it wouldn't offset the cost of the investment. So there is a capacity function for that type of request. So it would vary depending on the customers, what they were seeking. Smaller customers is different. So from this particular program or panel, it's hard to tie in. We can spend a lot of different time on very different examples.
Thank you, William. So maybe now could we go on to Mike, because I'd like to hear from Mike how the public sector, in the form of Eskom, in the form of the IPP office, in the form of NERSA, sees these hybrid solutions. I know that when RMI quadruple P was issued, and in answers to all clarification questions, they were very clear that they were technology agnostic. They didn't care what solution you provided, as long as you could provide dispatchable power between certain hours of the day when you were asked to dispatch by Eskom. That was the solution they wanted. It was up to the individual bidders, like William, to bid a technology or combination of technologies that could meet that demand, or that dispatch demand. So it would be interesting to know whether Eskom itself has looked at providing these kind of hybrid solutions beyond its coal, and how the IPP office and NERSA see these hybrid solutions?
I think my sense is we need some context here. So there are a number of, or a few things that are critically important to South Africa. The extent to which this importance is recognized by government, Eskom, the regulator, and others who are basically defining and setting policy is somewhat disjointed, and it's not well coordinated. However, for South Africa, there can be no doubt that the price of electricity, the ultimate price that the consumers pay, is very high, and the escalation thereof is of great concern, particularly for industry. Secondly, we all know that the utility, Eskom in this case, and even municipalities are struggling to maintain a reliable supply to their customers. That being said, there can be no doubt, and this is an international trend, that as far as pricing goes, we should be supporting energy costs that are falling in real terms. And quite frankly, the two technologies, costs of which are falling in real terms significantly, is solar and, strangely enough, batteries. The costs here are coming down at an amazing rate. So it's a no-brainer that these two technologies should be supported, and supported in a big way. And the delivery thereof, the best form, I believe, is through the hybrid methodology, or hybrids. And also the issue around paying for this energy, and if you will, whatever capacity it provides, needs to be supported much more aggressively by policy, which has not been the case. And the reason for this is that there's a big misunderstanding, in partly due by Eskom, not so much by the technical people in Eskom, but maybe financial, and that is that they continuously argue that these hybrid solutions and others are causing them pains insofar as that it's taking energy sales from them. This is a complete nonsense, because in the end analysis, we must look at South Africa as a whole. And in that regard, the best way to deliver these two technologies, i.e. solar and also batteries to play their part, is in fact to promote them and also to deliver them through hybrids. It provides diversity across the country, and so the policy needs to follow this international trend. And I think we can do a lot more in South Africa, both from the energy department, from Eskom, and the regulator to promote it. It's encouraging to note that the president has announced that they want to do this, but I think the actions taken on the ground for actual implementation, rather than just policy pronouncements, is way too slow, and we can push that a lot more.
Thanks, Mike. Gabriel, I think I'd like to go to you next, because you're going to come along and you're going to supply, as I understand it, to a client a solution which would include a hybrid energy solution. What are the solutions you offer in this, and where are your clients based? Are they based here in South Africa? Are they based outside of South Africa? And if they're based in South Africa, what is their motivation for seeking a solution from you? Is it, as Mike has alluded to, the fact that our electricity is just becoming increasingly expensive and increasingly unreliable?
Hi, baby. Thanks for having us on the panel. So firstly, the context here, we need to understand that South Africa is very different, or the energy requirements in South Africa, or the solutions that we require here, is very different to the typical solutions that people require, outside of the South African borders in the rest of the sub-Saharan African countries, where, South Africa is mostly grid connected. So most of the projects that we're designing here, have the grid as some form of backup, which means that you're sizing the system, both solar and batteries, to catch, the bulk of the primary energy sources, whereas If you are sizing a system, be it solar or batteries or gas or any bio waste, for an off-grid system, the sizing methodology is very different, because then you can't afford to run out of power. If you run out of power, there's no backup to fall onto. And something that I found is that adequately sizing or analyzing the need is something that often lacks in most of the scenarios that we find ourselves in. William, interestingly enough, said that we give the client what they ask for. They provide us with information that they demand. But more often than not, we have discussions with the clients, and they have something in their mind they think they want, but they have no idea. I can't tell you how often we get a call or a question to say, hey, we've got load shedding, can you please put on solar? And solar isn't a solution to load shedding, and batteries are. But that said, something that also has been alluded to before is that batteries don't generate any energy. They can only store energy that is generated, either by the grid or by solar or by wind or by something else. So that comes back to the initial topic here, is that the hybrid, the blend of these solutions is really what the client needs, and spending the adequate amount of time to understand exactly their energy needs, the solution, and what type of environment they find themselves in. We're busy with some projects in Mauritius at the moment, for example. There's some an industrial bakery there, but sizing there and the cost aspects that go into that, with a weak grid, is very different. They're willing to pay, or able to, or have to be able to pay a bit more to have that uptime availability. And the cost benefit is not really just the cost of energy, but it's the loss of production that they are seeing, increased productivity, increased operations, which really plays into what we call stacked benefits of the battery. So to answer your question, in South Africa itself, the bulk of our demands are solar mostly, with some batteries for load shedding or for shifting during a period, while the backup generator comes on here and there. But it's still a relatively small portion of the projects that we do. Although we have seen a massive increase, in the past year, where, let's say, up until 2019, maybe mid-2020, we didn't get that many requests for batteries. But in the past year, at least, almost every request that we've received, the guys asked, but please give me a proposal for batteries, or can we do batteries? How do we add batteries to the site in order to provide us with that grid resilience, so that we can ride through 2 hours of load shedding or whatever the case may be. In the northern parts of Southern Africa, or the remainder of Sub-Saharan Africa, we're seeing proper hybrids, mini grids or microgrids coming to life, where guys are having to install a solar and a battery to give them power through the night. And in that case, we have to basically over-install the solar to both meet the demands of the daytime load, but have excess solar available to charge these batteries, to go through the evenings, and then to ride them, to provide them with power up until the next sunrise in the next morning. So the mindset and the whole design approach there is a very different one, as opposed to being just a commercial cost-saving exercise that you would find in typical grid-connected scenarios such as South Africa.
Thanks, Gabriel. And your solutions, I presume, are modular so that if a client thinks they want so many megawatts, but it subsequently turns out they need a bit more, you can add a unit of battery, you can add a unit of solar panels.
That's one of the beauties of the solar and the battery industry, where they are very, very modular. It can go from as small as a couple of kilowatts on the residential side, to the 80 megawatts that William and so we're talking about. And I know Eskom had some big projects in mind, that we were sizing for them at one stage. But what I do find challenging though at the moment is in terms of the actual availability of support for the typical commercial industrial size. The residential side is very well supplied. The residential market, the technologies, the hardware, batteries, inverters are readily available, and they're off-the-shelf plug-and-play type of items. Then on the very, very big utility scale projects, you get proper engineering support from the large manufacturers, the industry, leaders in technology. But in the middle space, there's a bit of a gap where the projects are too big for the residential guys to scale up. You can't just add 50 of these inverters together and supply a commercial shopping center with batteries like that. But it's too small for the big utility scale players to provide you with full-on engineering support and product support and hardware integration. So that's really been a challenge for us, where conceptually the technology is available and it is manufactured, but getting proper support and getting local suppliers to fill the gap in that space has been hard. But we're finding the private sector now driving this. They're driving the demand for these solutions. Guys are bringing them in and buying it internationally and shipping it in. And that would also definitely enable mini grids and microgrids to go forward, because those are the typical sizes that a small cluster of houses somewhere in rural Tanzania would be. It's bigger than the residential side, but it's much smaller than a big utility scale project. And I think the industry is really learning how to go about dealing with that middle block of technologies and solutions. And hopefully the more that these come off the ground, the more we'll learn, and the quicker they will be deployed or deployable for future demands.
Thanks, Gabriel. Just to everyone who's watching this video, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box, and we will try and answer them. I think where Gabriel left it, I'd like to then pick up with Danny. Danny, you had mentioned in our pre-chat that a lot of your work is at looking at expanding the mini grid systems and the productive use of the mini grid systems. How do you do this with your hybrid solutions, and really, who are your clients? I mean, I think Gabriel's clients seem to be the bigger commercial and perhaps mining operations. Who are your clients? Are they those commercial operations, or are they the villages in more remote areas that just want to club together and get a little bit of electricity?
Yeah, thank you for having me here as well. So basically we come from the solar home system, standalone solar home system sector. So in the beginning we started to develop standalone solar home systems and brought them to the rural areas. Then later, we basically found out during our operations that digitization is key to basically bring everything to these last mile. So that's why we started to develop IT services for our own in the beginning. And now also during the crisis, and so we found out that this is something more people or more business need. So one part, our clients are last mile distributors, solar product distributors. And on the other hand, we have mini grid developers who use our services. So at the moment, we built a platform which is for both for mini grid providers and standalone solar home system distributors or last mile distributors. And so for the moment, we provide energy as a service. So basically manage your customers, manage your payments, pay as you go, everything you need to manage your tariffs as a mini grid and also as a last mile distributor. And during that journey, we found out that both worlds can work together to basically reach our goal to electrify all the regions. So what we do is that, let's say in the radius of a mini grid ecosystem, you can electrify all the households. But it's mostly quite expensive to connect households that are outside this radius. And outside that radius, we can bring standalone solar home systems, which are long-lasting. They can be repaired, and this is basically for the leasing business model. So mini grid providers can focus on selling electricity and not selling solar home systems. But if they want, they can also basically sell solar home systems. So for us, it's combining both worlds. And one big issue, the second part, which you mentioned with the productive use, is that energy is just the beginning. So now we sell energy, and tomorrow we believe that selling services is what is important. So we could have water as a service, we can have cooling as a service, or transport as a service. So we have the power to basically build new business models in the ecosystems. So we think in ecosystems and combining both worlds. So another approach for productive use case could be fisher lamps as a service. So we would have standalone solar home systems for fishers if an ecosystem is nearby the sea, for instance. And then we have productive, like large mini grid providers who have cooling compartments and rent cooling compartments for farmers. So our approach is thinking in ecosystems and providing the digital services for mini grid providers as well as a solar home system manufacturers.
And you know, you are providing the mini grids, you are providing all these services, but how do you actually generate the power? Is it solar with battery again? Is that the technology you look at?
So for us, we can basically integrate any product. At the moment, our customers are typically have solar. So solar mini grids and also solar systems. But basically, if you have wind, whatever you have, if there's some possibility to integrate or to be connected with the internet or with a smartphone or something else, then we can integrate any product.
Thanks, Danny. So I'd quite like to get to you now, because I think what you spoke about in our pre-chat as well was that you really look at a variety of technologies to provide these hybrid solutions. Can you run us through them and how they all work together?
Okay, thank you, Biddy. Thank you for having me on this panel. Before I go into that detail, let me quickly explain that we are not providing any solutions ourselves, but we're working with developers, we're working with companies that are operating in this space that are in need for finance. There's a lot of people that come from the EPC world where they basically have put solar on roofs and now they want to grow. So how do you grow? You want to put more solar on more roofs, but at some point you need capital to grow. So what we do is we basically, from a program that's called Get Invest, supported by the European Union, there's an angle in there, there's a pillar in there focusing on finance, catalyzing finance for developers that work with renewables. We're doing solar pay-go, mini grids that Danny was referring to. We're doing CNI that Gabrielle was referring to. We're doing IPPs up to about 50 megawatts, looking at hydro, solar, wind, as well as biomass. So we do the whole suite. We've got about 25 independent advisors as part of the Finance Catalyst. And we basically make our services available for free, paid through the European Union on these projects. And our main focus is late stage development. So we come in when the project has done a pre-feasibility or a decent feasibility study, a draft financial model done. We basically clean that up to a level it becomes bankable, introduce to equity and debt providers, and then basically assist in the entire process of bringing the finance to the individual projects. Now, to come back to the two areas that are of concern for this panel, the hybridizations, what we see a lot is CNI has grown the past 3-4 years tremendously. In Kenya, Uganda, it's coming up now. Tanzania is slowly behind, but also in countries like Ghana, Sierra Leone, and South Africa, quite a bit of work done as well. Now, in the CNI space, we see a lot of projects that started as individual companies that said, we want to have solar on our roof. So they found a supplier, they found an EPC contractor that could do this. Now that EPC contractor figured out, I can do this not once, twice, I can do this 15 times. So at some point he was building a portfolio as an EPC contractor that became interesting, not just to hand over to the client when it was built, but actually to keep that portfolio. So what we see is a lot of the early stage companies, the ones that survived, because it's not everybody being successful. The early stage companies that stayed in the business are now developing asset finance companies, asset companies. They're basically, instead of just providing the EPC work and hand over the solar installation, maybe with operations and with a maintenance contract, Now they want to keep the assets themselves. Now for that, the type of financing that goes into that is completely different. So now you're looking at bringing equity into that company, grow that company to develop, build, but also to keep that as an asset on their books going forward. Then you see that happening in one country, and they take that concept to another country. So now you got asset companies in different companies, and at some point there will be holding companies on top of that, often put into Mauritius for obvious reasons. So we see that trend from building it as a development company, building a portfolio, then going into an asset company, going into a holding company that's got a number of asset companies under that. That's a combination that we see in Ghana, Sierra Leone, as well as in Kenya, Uganda, and then Kenya, Uganda combined with South Africa. So where we see now two regions actually saying, let's do this together, because we know it works there, we know it works in South Africa. In order to attract financing internationally, we need to have a minimum volume. And that volume is something that, $10 million is really the minimum these days where you can start looking at attracting finance successfully. So that's on the solar PV and diesel gensets. It's not being mentioned as if it's a dirty word, but diesel gensets and mini grids, diesel gensets in C&I operations with telecom operations. Certainly outside South Africa, where there is no backup from a grid, diesel gensets are still the backups being used left, right, and center. The same diesel gensets are being phased out by solar PV and batteries. So, but the diesel gensets are there, they're being used. It is extremely expensive power, but no power is more expensive than no power, especially when you have a production facility that's 24/7 and stop and go for many of the agro processing facilities is extremely expensive, as Gabriel mentioned earlier. So expensive power, maybe less expensive than diesel, the solar PV and batteries, and definitely much less expensive than not having power at all. Now, another area that we find a lot of work in these days is not these days, but in South Africa especially, is combined heat and power, where sawmill operations are generating a lot of waste, either at the factory itself, at the sawmill itself, or leaving a lot of the biomass behind in the forestry operations, using that biomass to actually generate heat that can be used for drying kilns, and of the same heat, the steam being used for generating power to be used at the sawmill itself and exported into nearby communities or even larger district towns that are in need of that power. Very simple, if you can call it simple from a technical perspective. You got a biomass source, you burn it, you get heat, you use the heat for drying, you use the heat for power generation. Where it becomes interesting and difficult is who's going to purchase your heat, who's going to purchase your power, and how do you structure the actual contracts around that. Now, when it stays, let's say, within a sawmill operation, the heat and power source can be easily ring-fenced, and there can be deals made with the sawmill operator saying, we provide you with the heat, we provide you with the power, and you provide us with all your waste and the facility operations, the facility environment where we can operate. That can be done as part of a PPA agreement or a power purchase or power heat agreement. However, once you take the power out of that ring fence environment and bring it into a municipality, wheeling it via an Eskom bid in this case, that's where the difficulties start. It's all theoretically possible, but from theory to practice, and even if you sell it to a municipality with a guarantee, let's say you sell 5 megawatts installed capacity to a municipality with a guarantee. If something goes wrong and you have to enforce a guarantee for just a mere 5 megawatts of installed capacity, now that amount of time and effort that goes into that and the costs that come with it might not be worth it. So even though you have a guarantee on paper, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bankable guarantee. And unfortunately, that's how a large number of the financiers look at these projects. Whenever it's in ring fence, it stays with the sawmill operations, it's okay. Because there you see, you've got an off-taker that's internationally recognized, that's got international business, and actually it's a credit-worthy off-taker. The moment it goes outside your ring fence operation and it goes into, let's say, more difficult areas where guarantees do exist, but probably not very enforceable, and Biddy, from your side with the law firm, you probably have cases like that, plenty. It becomes difficult to find finance for that. With the C&I, the same. When we start financing, the most important thing that we're looking at is the credit worthiness of the actual off-taker of the power. So if you put your solar on a manufacturing facility, let's say a cooking oil facility in Kenya, that cooking oil facility has a business that's got a future, that had a good past, it's got historic figures. That's an off-taker that you can work with that makes the entire project bankable. The same project with the same roof and selling the electricity to a mini grid operator would make it a completely different project from a financing perspective, because now your off-taker is no longer having the same creditworthiness as your owners of the roof where you put the solar. So what we do is.
Can I just interrupt you
sure.
there? Gabriel had a question. Gabriel, you put your hand up. You had a question earlier.
So I think it's also useful to mention here that there's different finances that Ada isn't perhaps explicitly stated, but on the bigger utility scale stuff, there's the project finance where you've got a specific set of lenders per project, and that would typically be different to financiers providing a credit facility or drawdown facility for an EPC to scale into a small sort of asset owner. Where in those particular cases, the guys would typically want to take up an equity stake in the EPC and put in some capital or cash in there, and have some form of control over that, because you mentioned, the sort of hurdle volume of around $10 million US. So, you can't, none of the small commercial and industrial projects that we're building, is even remotely close to that number. So you have to do 10, 15, 20 of those projects together to reach those volumes, or you have to have a pipeline that gets due diligence done on, and you bank the pipeline of some sorts, or maybe if you just want to give some context there, the different types of finances that you guys deal with, and the types of projects that they invest in, especially on the smaller space. Are the big lenders coming to the party? Are they willing to do project finance for smaller projects, or is it all just investments, growth capital that they're putting into these companies in order to allow them to scale?
Gabriel, I'll give a chance to answer, but just what I'm seeing in my practice is that, and to go to Ad's point, a lot of these people start out putting solutions on roofs, and then they want to put it into a portfolio of assets, and they then want to finance it. And the traditional big project finance lenders, and I'm thinking of the South African banks here, will come in and lend to those projects once there's a critical mass. They'll even lend early on if they're happy that there's a pipeline. But it's very, very important, and we've had to do a lot of reverse engineering on a number of these agreements to make sure that however you're selling your power, be it under a solar lease agreement or a power purchase agreement or your rooftop solar solution. I've also done things where we've used animal waste byproducts and converted those into energy and steam, and as I'd said, for offtake by the actual producer of the animal waste, who is a credit-worthy institution, that those underlying agreements are bankable, and very often they are not. So what you've signed up to in the early days might work for you and whoever else you're dealing with, but when you get a third-party financier coming in, they are not bankable, and you have to go and revisit those agreements with your landlords, with your off-takers. So that's just something to be aware of. And then I think maybe you can also answer Gabriel's question, but I had another question for you. Are there any technologies of the hybrids that you see that either European financial institutions or commercial banks will not finance? So we all know that nobody wants to finance coal anymore. Do you think there's going to be a swing towards that for diesel and for heavy fuel oil, which I know is used quite extensively in East Africa to generate power?
Well, you asked the wrong person. I've been in the business for 28 years, only renewables. They considered me to be crazy talking renewables in the early 90s in South Africa. So I'm not the right person to ask to answer heavy fuel oil questions. But I've worked for institutions that did shy away from it, only to realize that as part of a package, it's nice to introduce, let's say, this is Liberia, it's nice to introduce Mount Coffee hydro station, but if you don't have power in the capital, which is heavy fuel oil, for the first 5 years that you have to build Mount Coffee, you basically accept that heavy fuel oil is part of the package until you got a solution that's active and working and not just a plan. Because it's easy to plan renewables, but you got to implement them before they can actually substitute HFO and diesel and gas. Well, natural gas, I think, is still by far the cleanest fossil fuel anyway. So whatever they're doing in Mozambique makes sense in Mozambique. So who are we to say don't do it? Gabriel's question, as portfolios, aggregating small projects into a portfolio so it starts to make sense in terms of overhead spent on it before financiers step in. Absolutely. And the portfolios are the ones leading to asset companies. So it's an intermediary step. And the 10 million I mentioned is on the high side. We are actually doing from 5 million upwards. That's where we see there is appetite. But if what we used to do with smaller hydro projects, 200 kilowatts of hydro, you can't finance. But if you have 5 of them and you have a slightly bigger one, you can start looking at that. And now Danny's going to ask me, what about mini grid portfolios? If we work with PowerGen, if we work with Suncofa or with all the other ones that are in our portfolio, it's the only way. The work we do, Lesotho, is with a portfolio of about 20 projects with one power. So one project is to demonstrate it works. But what are you demonstrating? That the technology works, that you put a panel in the sun, that the sun generates power that you can put into a battery you can take out at night? That's easy. What you need to demonstrate is that the business around it works so that money is generated to repay for the assets you put on the ground. That's where the portfolios are going.
So Danny, what was your...
Yes, it was heading in this direction. So thank you. Thank you, Ed. So maybe one specific question. So some of our customers, they want to prove that their business model works, or let's say that their ecosystem works. So what we get, they ask us whether we can basically measure the complete ecosystem, not only in terms of financial KPIs, but also something which is also quite important for us is the impact, the social impact, so that you don't measure only the financial KPIs, but also you say, okay, how many jobs did I create in this ecosystem? How many women did I empower, for instance? Is this also something where you have experience, so that, or something you look at in terms of evaluating a ecosystem and projects in your portfolio?
Well, you're from Germany, Danny. You know that if European Union puts money into something, there's a whole list of social impact criteria to be, social impact parameters to be measured. So we do have the carbon dioxide, we do have the gender issue, the number of female-run businesses that we measure, numbers of jobs spread over age groups. So we're looking to see if we can support younger businesses, if that's possible at all. And then the usual ones, clean energy technologies. We're not looking, by the way, at specifically export-oriented from the EU. We're looking at things that make sense, and it doesn't matter where the technology comes from.
Thanks, Ed. Mike, I'd like to go back to you, because I think from what I've heard and from what we know, there are these solutions coming up. People are building them. Maybe they've got excess capacity that they could put into the grid. Is there any movement in the IPP office, in Eskom, in NERSA, to deal effectively with wheeling? Because that's been something we've really battled with in this country for a long time.
Yeah, the issue of wheeling has been a very big problem. And our personal experience in this, in the power project that when I was working in the mining industry, we wanted to put together, where there was a synergy in a company, a mining company that had both mining assets in coal and also had very large smelting assets, and they wanted to produce and supply their own power. And obviously the issue came down to wheeling. At one stage, to give you an idea, it would have been cheaper to truck the coal to the power station adjacent to the smelters than it would have been to wheel. This has changed some in that Eskom have published standardized wheeling tariffs, but still I think there's a lot of work that can be done and should be done in this regard. So wheeling is a challenge and remains so. And I think at the moment, the biggest work that has to be done is within Eskom, obviously with support of the regulator and government. But, you know, listening to all the panelists, and they're making very, very good comments, and I think we can all agree with the comments that have been made. But the one thing that we're not talking about, which I think is the most crucial issue in this whole discussion, is how do we enable all of this? In other words, so that the end users can start producing power, hybrids can come into play, and everything like that. So the first thing is, in regards to pricing, if you will, a PPA, whatever the case may be, at the moment the status quo is, and it varies, is that the suppliers are concerned about their tariffs that are being, or shall I say, their sales that are being eroded by independent power producers and also hybrids and so on, which is a wrong perception. And also they're only offering their current avoided costs as the price to the producers, which is nonsense. They should be offering the avoided costs of new generation, and this should be aided by the regulator and the generator. And the second thing, which I think is crucially important, it has been mentioned, I believe the aggregation of the smaller consumers is a major plus. It's happening all over the world. We had, when I was in the IPP office, discussions with people that are quite prepared to come in and do this as a profession, both putting up the systems and everything. And I think that would go a long way to enable and simplify the whole process of end users, where they don't have to go through this individual contracting with current suppliers such as Eskom and municipalities, but rather deal with an aggregator, and the aggregator then using that aggregated power to contract with Eskom distribution and also with the municipalities. So I think aggregation is a very big positive for the South African industry in this regard, and I think we should be promoting that.
Mike, can I react to the C&I space? And I'm not going to focus on South Africa because you've covered that, and I think it's most of us on the panel know what Eskom has put out as a way of dealing with people that put solar on their roofs, that some of the units that they will purchase from Eskom later on will be slightly more expensive. Now, KPLC in Kenya is a similar situation where they see their good customers leaving their grid connections, or at least not consuming as much as they used to. These are good customers in terms of volume, they're good customers in terms of time of day, they're good customers in terms of payment. You don't want to see them leave being a supplier of electricity. So KPLC is finding out what to do. Are we going to join the new movement in C&I, and are we going to be part of the companies and invest in these companies that are going to put C&I solutions out there? Or are we going to fight it with regulation and making it more difficult for these companies to operate? The jury is still out, but I hope that they will go towards moving jointly with the solutions that are out there that make sense, rather than fighting it through regulation, which they potentially could do being a government institution. So if anyone from KPLC is listening, guys, please, common sense, let it rule.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, Ed. And I do. Are there any just closing thoughts? I think we'll go through each panel member, and we'll start with Mike.
Yeah, as I said in my introductory comments, the whole issue around solar and batteries, from a technical academic point of view, there's absolutely no dispute that these are by far, in terms of the future, the best of investments that we can make. Solar, because of the prices that have now come down at such an alarming rate. I remember we did a study when I was still leading the early IRPs, and we had some consultants come to present to us their outward look, and this was work that was done in both Germany and in the USA. And the interesting thing is, at the time in IRP 2010, when they made their predictions of solar prices, the actual solar prices today is well better, way better than they predicted. And at the time, we thought these were ridiculous predictions, and yet the solar prices have come down well below their prediction. As far as batteries are concerned, I think it's been shown in particular in the United States and in Australia, that investing in batteries is a great idea, particularly in making renewables more economically or financially viable, and also the capacity that they add, and the avoidance of expensive alternate capacity additions such as diesel and so on. So I think we really need to pull out everything. That's first and foremost from Department of Energy, secondly from Eskom and the municipalities, and then obviously the regulator. These are key players in this discussion. Treasury has always been very, very supportive of the private sector and industry and consumers in general starting to play a more active role. And so I remain firm in what I said. I think aggregation is the way that South Africa can truly propel this ahead, and obviously sorting out a simple solution to the pricing thereof.
Thanks, Mike. Danny?
Yeah, so what came up to my mind during that discussion is, well, also the anchor customer. So if we look at financing, that we need someone who's basically buying all the electricity, and we have a good customer, but then also not forget like the people with a lower purchasing power, and have those ones also in the ecosystem as well. So yeah, as I said in the beginning, for us the learning is at the moment to enable business models and ecosystems, to foster anchor customers, and to make mini grid ecosystems economically viable, or faster economically viable and profitable. And we see this as key for and combining. So we see key to combine mini grids and standalone solar home systems, because they can work together and basically, yeah, foster economic growth in these regions, in ecosystems, so that yeah, we can reach the goal and reach as many people as fast as possible.
Thanks, Danny. Ad?
Yes, the final remark I want to make is, and this is towards more the public sector than the private sector guys that we only work with. Enabling environments, make it possible to wheel power, make it possible to enter into PPAs between parties, make it possible to have renewables enter the country with favorable import duties, if you like, or other tax regime instruments that you could use to boost these developments. It's not going to stop if you fight it. It's just going to take longer, and you're going to get tired. Use that energy, people in public service, to put an enabling environment up that makes private sector operate and assist everybody out there to get clean energy as much as possible. We at Get Invest, Finance Catalyst from the European Union, are there to assist. Comes at no charge, but we need to find enabling environments where we can put our services, our knowledge and expertise on the ground together with private companies. Looking forward to work with you. Thank you.
And last but certainly not least, Gabriel.
Yeah, I think over and above the enabling environments, there's the enabling technologies, and battery storage being one of them. Really, enabling us to get a high penetration of renewables into the grid. Whether it's wind or solar, and I guess in summary to all of these points, we need a credible off-taker. You need a credible technology, being solar or batteries, and a credible EPC to put all of this together for somebody to be able to put money into this thing, and to basically enable us to solve the energy needs in sub-Saharan Africa. So yeah, I think that would be my closing comments.
So I'd like to thank all our panelists. I think it's been a very interesting discussion, and I've certainly seen from working on various RMI quadruple P projects, the risk mitigation intermittent power producer program, to give it its full name, but I'm sure I've left out a P, that hybrids are definitely the future. And I can't see that we're going to procure any more rounds of renewables, certainly without battery storage, but I might be wrong, and Mike can laugh at me if he thinks I'm talking nonsense. But I think it is the way we're all going to have to go. We're going to have to get our heads around this. And I think to echo Ad's plea to whoever from the public sector is listening, we need to do this, and it will relieve. It'll go a long way to relieving Africa's energy needs and demands. Thank you all.